Hello my bookish friends, welcome back. I'm Elizabeth, this is Reading Riley, and today I'm going to tell you about my top 10 most surprising books of the year. I've purposefully tried not to overlap this with my favorite books of the year, so while some of my best books of the year were also surprising, these are not going to be included on that list. So these are all different books from the ones that I'm going to be talking about in that video. But what is a surprising book? What is a surprising book? It's not even necessarily a book that I gave 5 stars, but it is a book that I either didn't have the greatest expectations going into, or it was outside of my comfort zone, or for some reason I just was not expecting to like it as much as I did. So these are not going to be in any particular order. This is just the top 10. And these are not necessarily all books that came out this year, but books that I read this year. So let's get into it. The first book that I want to talk about is The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. I read this one this year knowing that I just needed to read a book by this author, and this was a new release this year, I believe, and it just had everything that I never knew that I always wanted. I stayed up till 3:30 in the morning reading this. It captured me from the beginning. I like to think of this as if Colleen Hoover wrote The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Colleen Hoover because it's so addicting. You start it and you just cannot stop. And Evelyn Hugo because the whole plot of this is that a true crime enthusiast, Shay, is interviewing this woman who was accused of murder years and years ago, and her life is being revealed to us as we go through. Meanwhile, there's mixed media in here. There's court transcripts. There is segments from a podcast. There is discussion about audiobooks, which I love. There's no flowery prose in here. It's just very straightforward prose that carefully reveals the little things that you need to know along the way. So we have this whole killer situation where did she or didn't she kill these people back in the 70s? We're also getting a dual timeline where we're actually showing Beth, I think is her name, Beth Greer, her life back in the 70s, what actually happened as she's telling the story to Shay. There's also a paranormal aspect of this, which I don't, is very like hit or miss with me, and this one did it just the right way that I ended up enjoying it, believing it. There's also talk about nature versus nurture, grief, guilt, psychopathy, all kinds of just things that I'm interested wrapped up into one book. I had such a good time with this. The next book I want to tell you about is 7 Days by Alex North. This was my first read from this author. I picked it up on a whim, really not expecting much. I think I got the audio on SCRIBD or something. It really blew my socks off. It was not what I was expecting. We're basically following Maggie, who's been abducted. I think she was like 16 when she was abducted, and now she's a woman. She's been living in this hole in the ground, the shed thing for years and years and years. Her abductor also sexually assaults her, and the result of that is pregnancy. And with each time she births a child, that child on their 3rd birthday gets taken away by her abductor. Now, in current day, she has her and her son. It's 7 days till his 3rd birthday, and we follow her through those 7 days. As she is coming to realize that this pattern is a thing, she has to figure out how to save her son and how to save herself and escape. And meanwhile, we're following her family, how this has affected them since she was taken away, the effects of that on their lives for having lost their daughter, sister, etc. And it's not one of those that's full of twists and turns. You kind of know going into the story what the circumstances are, but it's really about the journey, and it's high tension, stressful, and you really are just on her side this whole time, and you just root for her the entire time. I read it super quickly, ended up really enjoying it, and I would definitely recommend this one. The next book that just slapped me in the face, I was not expecting to love this one as much as I did, is The Book of Two Ways by Jodi Picoult. I read this for a themed vlog that I was doing based on the movie Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow. It's basically all kinds of books that show 2 sides of our lives. What if you continue living your life this way, and then what would have happened if you had done something else? And we're showing 2 different avenues. This one does that. It's so unexpectedly profound and cerebral. We're following this woman, Dawn. She's on a plane. The flight attendant says, hey, prepare for a crash landing. And in that moment, her husband and her child are not the first thing that comes to her mind. What comes to her mind is Wyatt, this guy that she was in grad school with, who she had this torrid affair with. That might be an exaggeration. She had this connection with him and they studied Egyptology together. And so she's having this whole like her life now versus what her life could have been. She ended up leaving college and leaving him to go take care of her mother, I think it was. Then she met her current husband, who is a scientist. So we get all of this stuff about Egyptology, which I had no idea. There is actual, like, real life information in this book about how to help someone who is grieving, which I thought was so practical and so wonderful to include in a book of fiction. And then with her husband, we get all this talk about multiple worlds, different dimensions, Schrodinger's cat. So that kind of like science aspect of it really was intriguing. It makes science fun, you know, quantum mechanics and theories and all kinds of stuff like that, which I love just like seeping into and just getting my mind warped and blown. So it was so much fun. And there was a twist in here that I did not see coming. Maybe I should have seen it coming, but for whatever reason I didn't. I had the rug pulled from underneath me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I was so shocked. This does, though, have an ambiguous ending, so if you don't like ambiguous endings, this may not be the one for you. But if you want something that's really thought-provoking and so carefully written and well executed, has a lot of nuance to it, and has a lot to say about life in general and how we lead our lives, kind of like Midnight Library. Like if you liked Midnight Library, I might recommend this one for you. I loved it. I had such a good time, and I was not expecting it at all. The next book I want to tell you about, I read, I think it was like the second book I read in 2022, and I was late on this one because I don't read memoirs. This is a memoir. I don't typically like memoirs. It's just not something that I gravitate towards. And so I finally was pushed to read this one and picked it up on a whim, not really expecting to like it because it was a memoir, and ended up changing my entire worldview, and that is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. She used to be known as Emily Doe before she came out. She was sexually assaulted by Brock Turner at a college party, I believe on the campus of Stanford. And I remember when the story came out, and I just, after reading this, I just was kicking myself for not being more involved, for not picketing, for not being there, for not doing something more for this woman, this amazingly vulnerable, eloquent, strong woman. Reading her story. Okay, so the story goes through the beginning, when it happened, and everything she had to go through with all of the court and the process for that, and how she had to go out on a limb in order to just get some kind of justice, and the decision that she had to make to do that, when it didn't even really pay off. Like I think he got 6 months in jail or something. It was not what it should have been. And then as she was going through that process, how the situation turned around on her and she was exploited and asked questions like, what were you wearing? And how much did you have to drink? Like, that matters. And this is so representative of how we treat women in general that I just think everyone should read this book. Every woman should read this book. Every man should read this book. Every human should read this book. The way she told the story was so profound, so eloquent, shocking and disturbing at the same time. For her to put it out there like that, to make herself so vulnerable, not only to fight the system after what happened to her, but to then like sit down and write all of that out in a book. Oh my gosh. Mind-blowing. So much respect. I think everyone should read her story because I think it helps us understand humanity and grow as people. So yeah, absolutely. This one, whew, hard hitter, very hard hitter. Next is a thriller that I didn't hear too many people talk about this year, and that again I just picked up on a whim and ended up really enjoying. I was not expecting to like this one. I mean, I wasn't expecting not to like it, but after I read it, I was like, you know what? This is really cool and interesting and different. And so I wanted to share that one with you. It is Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister, or Gillian McAllister, I'm not sure. This was the first book I read from this author, I believe. And off the bat, I could tell she is an observer of human nature. I loved how she talked about humanity and how she delved into her characters. So I think that's what connected to me most about this. There's a quote that I wrote down from this book. Banter can hide the worst sins. Some people laugh to hide their shame. They laugh instead of saying, I feel embarrassed and small. And that's something that I just really connected to, because even like, especially when I was younger, I would nervous laugh all the time. At a certain point in my life, I realized that I was doing that. And that's part of avoiding conflict, and it's part of growing up, I think anyway. I just really connected to that, and I felt seen by her. But anyway, this is the story of a mother who witnesses her son murdering someone on her front lawn. The next day, she wakes up, and then she realizes that event has not happened yet, and she is now living her life in reverse. So every day after that is actually a day before, and it goes back and back and back years. And there's so much in there about motherhood, about feeling judged by others, by how you parent. And we're also following this rookie police officer who is trying to fit in, trying to get his bearings within being a police officer at all, and he's kind of involved with the case. And so as you go back and back and back, you realize how we got to the place we're in now, and things are revealed about this family, about this mother. There are two twists in there that I thought were both really well executed and pulled off really well. I just thought this was a solid book, and not enough people are talking about it, and it did surprise me. So I would definitely recommend checking this one out if you're interested. But don't think that it's just gonna go back like a week, because it just keeps going back and back and back and back. But I really did enjoy it. The next book is also by an author I had never read, and again, I was just feeling like a domestic thriller. Like I just had this craving for just, you know, a domestic thriller. And so I picked it up on a whim. I think, again, oh no, this was recommended to me by my friend Kat. Shout out to Kat on Instagram. And she was like, I think you would like this, you should read this. And I was like, okay. And so I picked up the audiobook and I read it, and I really enjoyed it. It's called On a Quiet Street by Serafina Nova Glass. This is following three women, so it's not a huge cast. You have three women that you're following. They're living in this affluent neighborhood, and they each have their own things going on. We have Cora. Cora is kind of the helicopter mom. She's energetic, she's on top of everything, and she thinks her husband's cheating on her. And so she's just kind of waiting to catch him in the act. We're also following her friend Paige, whose son was killed the year before in a hit-and-run accident. They don't know who did it or what happened to him, and she is just living in the depths of grief. She's convinced that it was not an accident. She needs to find who did this. And so she is just going through all of the feelings, all of the emotions. And then there's their other neighbor, Georgia, who lives across the street, and neither one of them know her very well, but she is acting more and more strange every day. She has a newborn baby, and she's just doing some really weird things. And so, of course, in their quiet little neighborhood, they're spying, trying to figure out what's going on. And this book, it's not like mind-blowing by any means, but if you're in the mood for just like a quick, fast-paced domestic thriller, it absolutely captured my attention. It kept my interest the entire way through. There were enough twists and turns there to pique my interest, and I had a really good time with this one. Also, it's narrated by Imogen Church, who is one of my favorite audiobook narrators. She gives each woman a really distinctive voice, and she does a British accent as well as an American accent, and I just think she's so talented, and I definitely recommend the audiobook for this one. This next book I really wanted to include in my adult dystopian book list that I made because I really enjoyed this book, but it's young adult. It's so clearly young adult that I could not put it on that list. But if you're interested, I'll link it up here and down below if you're interested in dystopian books. This one is very much in the vein of Divergent or Hunger Games, so if you're looking for something up that alley, I would absolutely recommend this one, and that is The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. This one, again, I was just craving a dystopian book, and so I'd heard a lot about this and picked it up, not really expecting much, actually kind of expecting not to like it because I'm kind of past that young adult dystopian phase. But this one really hooked me in, and not only that, but it has so much to say about women. And so if you're looking to scratch that itch like I was, pick this one up like yesterday, like immediately. In this dystopian society, girls are said to have this power as they come of age. They have the power to lure grown men from their beds just from their existence. It like seeps from their skin, this like pheromone of sexuality. And we're in this kind of caste-like system where everything's very puritanical and holy as thou. So when girls turn 16, they must go away for their grace year, during which time they are supposed to use up their magic. of their feminine wiles and go out in the forest with each other, use up all of their magic, and so they can come home purified and ready for marriage. No one talks of the grace year. Women who have gone through it and come back, they are not to discuss it. We are not to talk about it at all. So when you're going into it, you just don't know what to expect. And not all of the girls make it back every year. So first you got to survive that in order to come home and then basically get sold off into marriage like a product. And so we're following Tierney James, and she is not satisfied with this life. She has questions. She's very much a Katniss Everdeen. She's not like other girls. She's not willing to just buy into this. She doesn't understand why these girls have to kind of fight for hierarchy within the system. So when they go off to their grace year, let's just say it's not what they expected. And so there's a lot of commentary in here about how women treat each other, and about how if we were not just pitted against each other, if we would actually help each other out and lift each other up, then we could make so much progress. And I just loved that sentiment. And I loved how it's taking this dystopian world and comparing it to the patriarchy, basically in how we live, and pointing out how we are forced to be in this position where we feel like we have to battle it out with one another to be okay, to be safe, to be happy, to be all of these things, when in reality, that's not the case. And so, gosh, I just thought this was so well done. There is a little bit of insta love in there and, you know, some like YA stuff, and that's to be expected. But overall, for a young adult book, this really was well done and hit the spot for me. If you haven't gotten to this one yet, I would absolutely recommend it. The next book I want to talk about is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I recently read this one, and this was by the recommendation of Ashley from Ashley's Little Library, and this surprised me. I have heard a lot of conflicting reviews of this author, hadn't read from her before, picked it up just on a whim, found this in Target, I think, or something, and ended up really enjoying this one. Again, kind of a classic domestic thriller. So if you're looking for that, I would recommend this one. It's high stakes. There's a lot that goes on. We're following this woman who is on parole from prison. She's been in prison for years and she can't get a job. She's living in her car and she's desperate. She finds this ad that was put up by this woman in this affluent community for a housemaid, and hence the title. And so she decides, what the hell, I want to say audition, what's the word? Interview for this job, and if I get it, great. She goes on this interview. She thinks it goes well, but she doesn't hear anything, so she's going and interviewing in fast food places and all of this stuff, and everyone's just shutting her down. They're like, no, we don't want someone with your record working in our establishment. And then surprisingly, she gets a call back from Nina, and Nina says, hey, we'd love to have you. When can you start? Come on in. It's a live-in position. She doesn't have to live in her car. She gets there and Nina starts acting a little funny. And she's kind of seeing this 180 of this personality where she did not expect based on the interview that she had with her. It kind of seems like Nina has something against her, but she is determined and desperate to keep this job. And so she stays on. And the twists and turns go from there. Again, I really want to compare this to another book, but I think that would probably give it away. So I'm not going to, but just keep in mind if you're looking for like a fun, quick, fast-paced domestic thriller. Again, it's not like mind-shattering, but it is fun. It was a good ride and it surprised me. Next, I want to talk about Below by Laurel Hightower. I think I read this for Ashley's 24-hour horror-thon. Didn't know what to expect going into this. This is a horror book. It does have some kind of speculative things within there, so keep that in mind. But it's set in isolation in the snow, which we love. This woman, she's just divorced her husband and she's driving across country. She's picked up her stuff, she's taken it, and she's out of there. There is a snowstorm. She stops at this rest stop and she has to decide if she's going to continue on or not. She meets this guy who's driving a semi-truck. She doesn't really know him, but he kind of offers to help her out and kind of guide her through this little valley? No, this like mountainside area. They have an accident in the road, and the rest of the story is her trying to survive this storm. This is absolutely a survival story, but she takes it in a really, really weird direction that I loved. There's also a lot of commentary in here about women as well, about speaking up for yourself, taking your own path and doing what is right for you despite what others might think or despite what you're used to or you're comfortable with, which I really, really loved that commentary. It gets into this really just a weird, speculative, supernatural Mothman element that I really don't want to say too much about because I don't want to spoil anything. But I closed this book thinking, wow, that was good. I need to read more from this author. Very surprising and enjoyable experience, and it was a super quick read. Deserves to be on this list. My last book that I want to talk about in my most surprising books of the year is one, I think I most recently read this one. It was in my wrap up from last month, and that is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. I was interested in this from the beginning, but I was a little reticent because there's like this whole haunted house aspect to it. And like I said before, haunted house things, it's hit or miss for me. But this one was surprisingly and amazingly weird. If you want a weird haunted house book, this is it. I would compare this to Mexican Gothic based on like some of the disgusting descriptions within this, and that stuff I just loved. It just sucked me right in. So in this story, we're following Vera. She's going back to her childhood home, the Crowder house. I do think that part of the premise in the description on Goodreads and on the cover of the book spoils some of the fun. So go into this knowing as little as possible if you can. This house has stories to tell. It really delves into her nuanced relationship with both of her parents. Some terrible things happened in this house, and she really has to face that head on when she does go back. We get two timelines, so we also have a past timeline where we're learning about her childhood, growing up in that house, her friends, and how she came to be the person she is today. And then we're also following her in current day, where she's coming back and she's having to face kind of these things that happened in her house long ago. This relationship with her mother, there's a lot of family dynamic type discussions in here, and Vera herself, the whole time, you don't know if you can trust her or not. And the way it turns out, the twist in here, just so off the wall, wacky and weird and terrifying. I loved it. I loved it. If you want a weird horror haunted house book, pick up Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. Absolutely 100% recommend it. And that's it. Those are my most surprising books of the year. I'm going to have my best of the year coming up shortly, so hit that subscribe button if you have not already subscribed. Hit the like if you liked this video, and I will see you soon with another video. Don't forget that life is short, so read Riley. Cheers, and goodbye.